And if you're just tuning in, two unlikely mates, celebrity stylist Elliot Garno and Norm Smith medalist Isaac Smith are here to tell you what is what.
Hey, no Utes in the Valet.
Today's episode dives into a pretty big topic, homophobia in sport. It's one of those conversations that can be tricky to have, but one we need to. People like Angie Green have been pushing forward these conversations for years, and it's back in the spotlight with Mitch Brown's announcement as the AFL's first openly bisexual man. I'll be honest, I'm still learning, like so many people are, and that's what today's about. Coming with an open mind, asking questions, willing to listen.
Interesting one this week. We're sitting down. We've had so much fun over the past few weeks, getting to know our audience, having some great friends and guests on.
What, we're not going to have fun today?
Well, you can be the judge of that. But we've been flooded in the DMs and contacting from our friends about this particular topic.
Yes.
So do you want to introduce what we're talking about? Do you want me to? Let's go.
No, I can. And it is a contentious topic. But we the whole premise of this podcast was two worlds colliding, breaking down barriers. And this is a conversation, as you said, has dropped a lot in our DMs. People we know have mentioned it to us multiple times over the last few weeks, and it's homophobia in sport. So we're going to try and tackle it, and we're going to have a conversation about it. But I don't think it'll just be your normal conversation, because I think when you hear about it more often than not, it's usually two or three like-minded people from one community or two or three like-minded people from another community.
That's a good point, actually.
I feel like we're people from different communities, and that was the whole premise of this podcast. So we're going to try and tackle it. We'll see how it goes, and we'll see where we end up. But
I think to close out in the open, what's really been interesting about this podcast and you and I becoming such close mates throughout the process of this is that the worlds don't have to be so separated. And if we can have our audience take anything away from No Utes in the Valet, that it is that you can find commonality with people that you don't necessarily have the exact same opinion as. That doesn't necessarily mean that that person is against you in any way. It's just sometimes we just have different opinions about the same topic.
Yeah, it doesn't mean you're right or wrong, or it doesn't mean you can't be friends, or it doesn't mean you don't connect. But as you said, we've had a few, well, I think maybe I said it, but we've had a few people contact us and ask if we're going to touch on this topic.
So we throw it back to just really quickly touch on the brief history of we can speak to the AFL, and obviously you have a significant knowledge of the NRL, like a brief history of kind of say through the 1970s and the 1990s. There hasn't been really anyone except for Ian Roberts who came out in 1995, and he's actually still one of the few elite male Australian athletes who have come out across those two sports. The courage at that time, like in 1995, off the back of the AIDS pandemic, is crazy, because the Australian media was running ads about, I remember having a conversation with my mum even about the ads would spook them so much that they were scared to use public bathrooms that gay men could have potentially been in, or they were scared to interact with cutlery or whatever it may be, because there was so much stigma around it at the time. So, I mean, the courage is fucking mind-blowing in comparison to what the world is now to be able to potentially come out in, for him to have come out in back then. I mean, it's, to be honest, it's remarkable.
Yeah, it's like, I feel like I can't really comment on so much of this, but you know what's amazing is that Ian Roberts, growing up, I was a big rugby league fan, followed it. All I thought about Ian Roberts was a great rugby league player. That's all I remember of him in the 90s, and there was so much around him. But as a child, just watching him play sport, I just admire what he could do on the rugby league field. And I feel like it's crazy because, as you said, he's one of the only men that's come out openly gay in NRL, AFL, and I don't think the AFL's ever had anyone come out as openly gay. But all I remember from Ian Roberts, and I was a massive rugby league fan, was how good he was on the football field. Yeah.
So if we take it back to that time, right? Like, obviously, I mean, my opinion, and obviously you being an elite sportsman, you can really educate me here. Like, I've always thought of like AFL and NRL especially is like hyper masculine, like kind of very stoic, very kind of environments in where, you know, it's a boys' club, right? And so is the connotation that, you know, footy and that masculinity means strength, and then subsequently a homophobic slur, or, you know, calling someone a f*** or whatever it may be down the line, is implying that that person is weak. You know, is locker room language something that can be or has been overly homophobic in the past?
I reckon there's two parts to this. One, I want to question you on that. But initially, you talk about the locker room, and I was doing a little bit of reading up on Ian Roberts once we put all this together. And from what I've seen in a football locker room and from reading about Ian Roberts, and also talks about how his teammates looked after him and protected him. And I feel like that's what would happen in this day and age as well. If I was playing with a guy that was openly gay or not openly gay, privately gay, and didn't want it exposed.
That's actually also, to be honest, a really good point. Like, if your sexuality is actually nobody's business,
it's nobody's business.
But your own.
Yeah.
And at a time in which you're comfortable to share that, some people much earlier than others. I came out when I was 14.
Yeah.
But, I had friends who've come out well into their mid and late 20s.
Yeah.
But, and of course, people will go through marriages and then come out afterward. It is your prerogative. No one can put that societal pressure on you to tell you when you should do something that is so personal.
Yeah. But I think the locker rooms that I played in, they would do nothing but protect you and look after you. And you mentioned that it's a boys' club. It is a boys' club. And if one of their own feels threatened, they will go to the end to look after them and protect them. So I understand that there, culturally and historically, there would certainly be people that don't feel anywhere near comfortable sharing their public or private sexuality or whatever it is. But I think sometimes we get lost in the hysteria of it all, and being in that environment actually could be a positive.
So what was the question you were going to ask me?
The question I want to ask you is, so we talk about language and we talk about probably not actions. It's more around language and culture. But what makes something homophobic? Like, what does it make? Like, does a word make it homophobic? If I'm conversing with you and we're having a laugh, does that make it homophobic?
No,
from your personal point of view.
I think from my personal point of view, homophobia is something that devalues my identity as a gay man. So I would deem homophobia as something that's said or an action that is done that makes me feel less of a person for who I am, for something that I can't help. I am who I am.
So, for example, if you and I are having a joke,
but herein lies
where's the line?
But then herein lies the spectrum and the line, because some people are much more receptive to certain language versus others who might be much more sensitive to language. I think a lot of it comes down to triggers and the environment in which you grew up in and the way in which you were nurtured and supported to be yourself. I come from a background of great privilege in where my sexuality was never deemed a part of my personality. It was just the person that I was attracted to and that I was sleeping with. My family, I was so lucky, and I thank my lucky stars every day, to be honest, that my parents were so supportive and nurturing of that. So for me, my personal relationship with specific words or actions is probably a little bit more relaxed due to the fact that I feel very comfortable in hyper-masculine environments. My dad was the president of the local football club. I went to an all-boys Catholic school, and I was surrounded by a lot of straight men who I have great relationships with, but a lot of gay men who haven't necessarily had great relationships or interactions with straight men, or come from family environments for whether it's societal, religious reasons where they have been deemed that their life is wrong, understandably will have much more sensitivity towards specific words or actions. It's interesting. I remember growing up as a kid, and all of my best mates and everyone that I was surrounded with would never kind of like have a homophobic slur. Like, no one would like kind of have a crack. But I remember, and I don't know if this changes now, I'd be so interested to see if any of our younger listeners have had a similar experience as gay men. Like, you kind of occasionally would go to school on the tram or public transport or something, and someone would like yell out and call you a faggot when you're walking down the street because maybe I walked a certain way or I dressed a certain way or whatever it may be. And I do remember in those moments, I haven't thought about this for a really long time, I do remember in those moments feeling like really demoralized that I was made to feel lesser just for being myself. And I think that that's inexcusable across any landscape.
How'd you deal with it?
Well, I can be a bit of a so I just turned the negativity into power. I remember that there'd be certain aspects in my life where those would come up, and it took so much courage, but also I was so safe in my family life and my home that I was given so much courage that I would just kind of turn into power and be like, if you're going to call me a then I'll show you how good of a I can be, mate. You know what I mean? Like that was my way to deal with it. But that's been my way to kind of like deal with anything in my entire life. Adversity, I just tackle it head on.
Yeah.
You know, turn it into a weapon.
Was a coach of mine, and certainly has nothing to do with this topic, but he would always say, you don't need to let anyone know how you're feeling. You just show up and present whatever you've got to present. And sometimes that's really uncomfortable, and sometimes it's not ideal. Deep down, you might be feeling something else, but you talk about you've flipped it on its head, you've turned it into power. And I've only known you for a short period of time. One of the things I've learned from you, and one of the things that amazes me, is just how confident you stride through life. And I'm sure there's doubts, but I don't know if it's built off the back of that, but that's one thing I admire in you.
That's very kind. So if we bring it back to the kind of overarching conversation around this like kind of homophobia in the sport at the moment. So there's been a few incidents this year, Bailey Smith being the most recent. There was the pieces that came out with Isaac Rankin a couple months before that. So, like, what's the go? Like, why do we think that this stuff is still kind of happening in the AFL? It's interesting because, especially with the Bailey Smith thing, it kind of went in two directions. And what I thought was really interesting was a lot of like high-profile gay men, Australian celebrities, came out in support of Bailey and were like, that wasn't necessarily homophobic. I would back Joel Creasy in, and I'd back Josh Thomas in, only to the reason of what I just said to you about homophobia. Homophobia was when I felt like I was being demoralised. I didn't think that what Bailey was saying was degrading to the gay community. I don't think he thought of the intention. And again, it all comes back to the spectrum of severity and how you interpret your own sexuality. I have gay friends who are great mates with Bailey. I don't know him personally, and they love him. Yeah. So I can confidently say that he seems to be an ally. So to circle back on what we touched on earlier about the usage of language and specific slurs being said by specific footballers, do you think that Aussie sporting masculinity is evolving? Like we're still seeing some of the stuff that we saw throughout through the 70s and through the 90s.
No, I think it's definitely evolving. I think community's come such a long way. I even think about from when I started sport to now, and it has come leaps and bounds from where it was. And I think we can get hung up on individual instances that happen. And in the AFL now, there's self-reporting or there's reporting that has to happen with anything, whether it's vilification, racism, homophobia, whatever it is, sexism. Players, umpires, staff, anyone involved now has to self-report. And I'm sure that happens in most sports around the world. And to think what would have been being said 20 years ago versus how many instances there are now, I think it's come a long way. And I think throwing it all in a bag and saying it's just culture is an easy way to try and explain it all. But I would say the culture of football now, and I think AFLW's played a huge role in it.
Yeah,
that
definitely. There's so many openly gay women playing in the AFLW.
And there's so much more acceptance of homosexuality now than there ever was. And I go back to the point of talking about Ian Roberts saying he was protected by teammates. I think players now, men, we're talking, would be so protected by their teammates, by their clubs. And if anything, they'd be heroed. So it is a fascinating, difficult, complex conversation to have. And we're trying to have it right now. But I would say, and you talk about Bailey, I think, and Bailey's an ally, I think players like that have made huge leaps and bounds, not in necessarily this area, but in so many different areas in football.
Yeah, we spoke about it on our first or second episode, how much the culture of football has changed just in terms of brand alignment and Instagram posts and showing up in outfits and fancy cars and whatever. And obviously that's changed globally. Like we referenced the NBL in that episode, and obviously so much influence comes from America across the board in all media forms, sport being one of them. But yeah, I think it's interesting. I think that from my outsider's opinion looking in, it seems like especially the younger generation, like the Generation Z of AFL players, are so much more in tune with aesthetics. They like to get dressed up. They like to present themselves well. They like to go on nice holidays. They do all of these things
Would you say I'm one of them?
Well, first of all, I wouldn't say you're Gen Z, mate. I'm looking at a 50% grey beard. But
Have I moved
backwards? I'll take you for a Botox appointment. We can put that in. In another episode.
This is all natural.
Yeah, I can tell. But they're much more in tune with aesthetics.
Yeah,
and so maybe even I would go as far as saying much more image conscious and subsequently more open minded. I would say.
Yeah.
But it seems like they're still rooted in old expectations of like traditional masculinity in the AFL. That's just my perception. I obviously don't play AFL.
Oh, I think it's changed a lot.
Okay.
I feel like AFL football has evolved so much over the last 30 years, and 30 years sounds like a long time, but it feels like yesterday that we were kids running around. But I would say the industry is so accepting of anyone and anything, and I think the AFL as a whole has done a fantastic job at including anyone in society. And
true, I would agree with that.
Remember,
I would say that the AFL is definitely like championing inclusivity.
Yeah.
And they make a point of it. Pride Round started in, if I was to check my notes correctly, I've got paper in front of me, 2016, correct, thank you.
Did Sydney play Fremantle in a pre-season game, and then it started, I think, in 2016 with St Kilda was the first Pride game. But I think the AFL do so well, and the players do so well at jumping on the back of whatever the club and the AFL want to push as a whole and supporting it and championing it. There are so many activations as a player that I was involved in. I just think...
Do you feel like it's tokenistic when you're forced to do that? Maybe it might not necessarily be your choice. I know that's quite a difficult question to answer.
That is... It isn't a choice, really, but I think what you learn as an elite sports person and someone that's being involved in the AFL or NRL or whatever you do sport-wise is that you start to see the impact it can have outside, and you don't realise the impact you can have until you're genuinely involved in it.
Part of the movement.
Yeah, and you might have people in your life that are like, why is the AFL pushing this, or why is your club pushing that, which are genuine, valid questions, because some people go to the football...
Just to watch the footy and switch off.
Just to watch the football and switch off from their life, and they don't want any political agenda being pushed down their throat, because that is their time to sit back, relax, and enjoy 3 hours of football. But...
I think that as... the country's national sport, it would be remiss of them to not acknowledge their responsibility to the wider community as well.
And it would be.
It's very difficult because they want to entertain the traditionalists while also entertaining the progressives.
Which I think is important. You need to be
You can't isolate one audience at the potential loss of the other.
No, you can't. You certainly can't. And by doing one, and we shouldn't be talking about right or wrong, but...
There is no right or wrong.
But everyone has the ability to go and how would I frame it? Go and consume AFL football in the way that they want to consume AFL football, and if that is a relaxation, or if that is a release from what their life is day to day, or if they want to make a bigger impact in the wider community, that's fine as well. But I think everyone deserves the right to consume football the way they want to. But what I would say is that after being a player and realising the impact that you can have in the community, and realising that you can go to a school, you can go to an event, you can not do anything but wear rainbow-coloured socks at training, and that can just
accessorising.
That can just start a conversation in the community is something pretty powerful. And the AFL has done an amazing job at accepting. Like I remember going to the football in the 90s, and it was predominantly men, and you would always see fights in the crowd. Now I would say the AFL is one of the most family-friendly attended sports in the world.
I've got a lot of single girlfriends who are going there to pick up blokes too.
Yeah,
so it's a good dating scene for all those single ladies listening.
But you can go and feel safe and comfortable in the environment you're in, and I wouldn't say that would be true for many sports globally.
So let's get down to the nitty gritty, and we'll kind of finish on this point. Is that the elements or the concept of homophobia, and we'll speak specifically to the AFL, obviously our subject matter that we know best. I think that what's interesting in the way that is, like, the AFL's doing a heap, but it comes down to like intent and education. You really have to, and as I said, my personal interpretation of homophobia is when I'm made to feel devalued. All that anybody wants to be in this world, no matter who you are and no matter where you come from, is to feel like you're respected.
Yeah.
And so if collectively that, yes, externally it looks like everything's going on all right and it's pride rounds and all of this and all that, that's great. That's a step in the right direction. As you said, it impacts community, which is super important. But I think that maybe it's just having those difficult conversations as well and just being like making people feel like they're welcome and that they are accepted. That's not to say that someone's come out and that they have had a bad experience at a football club, as far as I know of anyway. But, you know, I think it just comes down to just a little bit more education and also having those conversations with gay people about where their comfort level lands. My comfort level is very different to somebody else's. So it's just making sure that you are aware of where that person you're engaging with feels comfortable. Because whilst publicly everything's doing a really good job, everybody will have their own interpretation and iteration of where they feel the best in their own sexuality.
Well, I think where it comes down to is, and it sounds silly, but building relationships, having a connection with someone, and then
Stop flattering me.
No, but then you actually you find the line of where the banter is in a relationship.
Totally.
Where if it's someone that you have no relationship with, then you have no idea where the line is. So
don't be throwing F-bombs on the AFL field to people that you don't necessarily know where their boundaries are, because that's setting a terrible example not only to your fellow teammates but also to the audience who idolises you. I think it's so important that all kids watching footy need to see that gay doesn't mean that you're any different or that you're excluded whatsoever.
And to close it off, I think there's sort of two parts to this. One, it is so difficult to have this conversation as friends. Not difficult, it's just a hard conversation to navigate.
Well, I mean, like, obviously it's so nuanced, right? There's so many different factors that contribute to this, but I've never felt like this is a difficult conversation for us to have.
I don't feel like it's a difficult conversation in the sense that me and you talking to each other. I feel like it's difficult because, as you said, there's just so many different moving parts to it.
But I think that that's a really important note to end on, because ultimately there are so many different moving parts. There are people who require education. There are people who require a microphone to do that education. Whether we're equipped to be educating is left to interpretation. But as I just said, have the conversations with people. The only way that you can educate yourself is to listen to other people.